Man, I don't know if this is a good omen or a bad omen. The last two times I taught, there was a lot of good conversation. We had some great conversation in class. Now it got utterly quiet, so I'm a little concerned. We still got a few minutes. And that is not what we're going to be talking about. You sure? No. Tim, that's not. Let's try that again, because we wouldn't get very far tonight. So while it is coming up, tonight we're going to be talking about continuing our study on Christian attitudes being the heart of the matter. And tonight our discussion topic is our attitude towards marriage. And it's probably quite fortunate that my opportunity to stand before you this evening actually coincides with the individual that was present and presided over my marriage some 32 years ago is in the audience. So we'll see how that goes. We also, this is kind of starting 4 classes, so I hope I don't touch on Tim's the next two class periods that much, but tonight we're going to focus upon our attitude towards marriage. Next class period, attitude towards husbands, then wives, going a little deeper, and then lastly we'll kind of have a 4th class surrounding the family, attitudes kind of towards the parents and the responsibilities in raising our children. So tonight, our objective as we kind of progress through our conversation this evening is to hopefully walk away with a very clear understanding and recognize God's design for marriage. To recognize that marriage is a covenant. To recognize that marriage is a reflection of Christ's relationship with the church. And as we go about the conversation of each of these 3 and progress through our discussion tonight, hopefully we'll be able to identify, attitudes that will help strengthen our marriage or attitudes that can actually weaken a marriage as we progress through this. So when we think about the world and their opinion, society that we live in today, why do people get married? Sometimes it's family expectations that they didn't get married, right? It can be almost, in a sense, kind of how you were brought up, a legacy perspective. Your parents were married, your grandparents were married, your great-grandparents, et cetera, et cetera. It could be an arranged marriage from that perspective, from a societal basis. Some other comments that Colin mentioned. Some people get married because of loneliness, seeking companionship. What else? Everybody else is doing it. Yeah, no, exactly. Why, if they're going into this arrangement, why can I not do that myself? What are the reasons people get married? Love is a feeling. Yeah. Love.
I think some people probably think there's a permanence to it, even though they may not be committing themselves to a lifelong relationship.
Yeah.
It's more permanent than other relationships.
An idea of stability, permanence, provides more of a solid relationship if they have the intention of having children or bringing them into the world, that there is that element to it. Surprised no one's mentioned that there is, financial benefits, tax implications, right? I want that, additional deduction. I want the other benefit on my health insurance with work, et cetera. Love, yeah, several of these: love, companionship, commitment, legal benefits, right? I mean, people enter into it today from the perspective of that. It helps me out from a legal perspective. Financial benefits, social benefits, stability, security, a great environment to be able to raise children. But in regards to that, what's maybe the most thing that you think people misunderstand about marriage? The permanence of marriage, yes. A lot of different perceptions and ideals in regards to that. Can go into it with the intent of it, but may not actually have the fortitude to continue from a permanent. What else?
I had a conversation many, many years ago. Mike was working out of town and was gone mostly during the week, and I would see him on the weekends. And the lady I was working with said, "How do you make it work?" She said, "I'm fixing to have to go through that, and I'm not sure I can make a marriage work." And I told her it's a commitment. You don't, I said, "We went into this, and divorce is not an option. We made a commitment to each other." She said, "I just don't know if I can do that."
Yeah, yeah. The idea of commitment, the permanence of it. Good illustration. What else?
How hard it is to make it
How
work.
hard it is to make it work. Yeah. A lot of effort and energy goes into it, and people often underestimate what that may be. I've married my best friend, so things will be easy, and we'll never have any roadblocks or hiccups or difficult conversations that may challenge your commitment to one another. What else do you think people misunderstand about marriage? It's not about me. Yeah. We'll dive into that at a great depth, but yeah, it's not about me.
It's not always going to be rosy.
It's not always going to be rosy. There's going to be difficult times. Yeah. I think a lot of times people often misunderstand the origin of marriage, of where it actually originated from. So different thoughts, different concepts about why people tend to get married, why they may have a misunderstanding about marriage. Phones down, no cheating ahead of time, and don't go Googling the answers to these, right? But this is from a Gallup poll this past May. It's conducted from the 1st to the 18th, and I forgot to look up what the sample size of it was, but it was enough to where they published the results. So they asked several questions. Some of them kind of were around the periphery of marriage, but I thought it was interesting from the perspective of this is kind of what they determined from their sample size, what people may thought. They posed a question not to the extent of actually whether you thought something was legal or not, or whether you thought legislation should be passed to enforce it, right? So put that completely aside. The question was, in general, is it morally acceptable or morally wrong? So the first question that I had here, they talked about relationships or relations between an unmarried man and woman. 68% thought it was acceptable, 29 wrong. 1 said depends, and 2 had no opinion. An affair between a married man and a woman, 8% found that acceptable, which I kind of thought that was lower than what my mind would have said it was going to be. I would have maybe kind of tended to think that that was a little bit going to be higher, but anyway, 8%, 89%, 9 out of 10 almost have the opinion that that was wrong. What about divorce? What do you think that acceptable number is?
Probably
Pretty high? What's a high number? Over 50? 75%, yeah, 75%. So it's, the way I kind of read those three was it's acceptable to have relations if you're unmarried, but if you're married, no, but then you can easily justify and get a divorce and go about and do whatever you want, right? So while you're married, you got to stay with the one that you've been betrothed to, but outside of that. What about married person having more than one spouse? What's that acceptable number look like? 2%, 10%, 0? 21%, 1 out of 5 people. 1 out of 5 people, a married person has more than one spouse. That is morally acceptable. The reason I put all of these is because we're very, very, very familiar, right, with Romans 12. Don't be conformed to this world. And that this is the type of society that we operate in, where people think in this fashion that divorce, 4 out of 5 people, 8 out of 10 think that it's basically perfectly morally acceptable to do that. 2 out of 20% think that it's perfectly morally acceptable to have more than one spouse. We're challenged to not be conformed to this world, to not think like this world thinks, but we need to see marriage as God sees marriage. And so let's look at that. So we talk about first about what is God's design for marriage, and turn to Genesis chapter 2. Go back to the very beginning. So Genesis chapter 2 is a little bit of a deeper dissertation upon some of the events on day 6, as we kind of read about in Genesis chapter 1. Beginning in verse 18, it writes, "Then the Lord God said, 'It is not good that man should be alone. I will make a helper fit for him.' Now out of the ground the Lord God had formed every beast of the field, every bird of the heavens, and brought them to the man to see what he would call them. And whatever the man called every living creature, that was its name. The man gave names to all the livestock and to the birds of the heavens and to every beast of the field. But for Adam there was not found a helper fit for him. So the Lord God caused a deep sleep to fall upon the man, and while he slept, took one of his ribs and closed up its place with flesh. And the rib that the Lord God had taken from the man, he made into a woman and brought her to the man. And the man said, 'This at last is bone of my bones, flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman because she was taken out of man. Therefore a man shall leave his father and his mother and hold fast to his wife, and they shall become one flesh.'" What jumps out of you to you in this passage regarding God's design for marriage?
Well, first of all, that man needs, he's a relational being, and he needs someone like him. He's incomplete without somebody like him in some ways, and unlike him in other ways.
Yes. There is that, to what Tim alluded to, there's the relational nature of us as humans. And it's interesting that throughout, as you read the first chapter, right, you constantly over and over see the language, "and it was good, and it was good, and it was good." And what do we see here at the beginning of chapter 2 and verse 18? It is not good that man should be alone. there was something that was identified, whether that was done for Adam's benefit or not. I don't think God figured out at the last moment that, okay, this is not how it's going to work out, whether that was said for Adam's benefit or not. But for our benefit, it illustrates that a relationship was necessary. What else do you see in this? It's a relationship between a man and a woman. Adam was first, from him Eve was created, and the two then became one. You have this idea of a permanence, a sacred union between a man and a woman, leaving his mother and father. What else do you see and notice in these passages?
That there's a fit, and the Hebrew word for fit, it means according to the opposite of. So there are two pieces that fit together and make a whole, as it were. Hence what Adam says at the end about two becoming one.
The two becoming one, they fit together. And that goes a little bit to where I think earlier you had mentioned that, where it talks about making a helper fit for him, right? And the idea of providing a helper is not in a sense of I think, not in a sense of something being lesser, but it was more in a sense of providing what was lacking, right? It was complementary. They complete one another. It's a complementary relationship. They make each other whole as a result of that.
In fact, it's interesting, God is our helper. Mentioned several times in the Psalms and other places, and it's the exact same word.
Yes.
He provides and helps us with what we need.
Yes. He helps us, completes us with anything. And even in this situation, right, it's I think evident to all of us here, but marriage was God's idea, right? It's not society's invention. It's not something that we have come up with to navigate the ins and outs of this world, but it was God's idea. God recognized that. God recognized that man should not be alone and created him. From the very beginning of creation, yes. We'll see that later. I mean, Jesus is posed with questions by the Pharisees, and his first answer in response to it is like, we'll see, have you not read? He goes very back to the beginning, to this right here, in regards to the foundation for what the marriage relationship should be. So marriage was God's idea, not society's invention. They were created to complement, complete one another, and the idea of two becoming one, a permanent and sacred union. So when we think now about God's covenant view of marriage and the words that he uses to describe that, the idea of covenant has a lot of emphasis and weight, particularly as regards to how God approaches that word. Let's look at several passages here. Look first at Proverbs chapter 2. And marriage is spoken of as a covenant in several places. Sometimes it's used in places to call out awareness to those who are actually not living up to what it was, right? So in the perspective of calling out their attitudes and their direction, which in here, Proverbs chapter 2, look at verses 16 and 17. It says, so you will be delivered, I guess, going all the way back up to the beginning of the chapter. My son, if you receive my words and my commandments with you, make your ear attentive to wisdom, incline your heart to understanding. And he goes on from that. And as a result, he gets down in situation in verse 16. It says, so you will be delivered from the forbidden woman, from the adulteress with her smooth words, who forsakes the companion of her youth and forgets the covenant of her God. And then look over in Malachi chapter 2. Malachi chapter 2. Look at verses 13 through 16. We'll back up to verse 10, actually. It says, "Have we not all one Father? Has not one God created us? Why then are we faithless to one another, profaning the covenant of our fathers? Judah has been faithless, and abomination is committed in Israel and in Jerusalem. For Judah has profaned the sanctuary of the Lord, which he loves, and has married the daughter of a foreign god. And may the Lord cut off from the tents of Jacob any descendant of the man who does this, who brings an offering to the Lord of hosts. And the second thing you do, you cover the Lord's altar with tears, with weeping and groaning, because he no longer regards the offering or accepts it with favor from your hand. But you say, why does he not? Because the Lord was witness between you and the wife of your youth, to whom you have been faithless, though she is your companion and your wife by covenant." Here we see that, Malachi speaking to those that had returned from the Babylonian captivity, and we see that their relationship with God, their relationship was empty. It wasn't what it should be, and a huge part of that was of how they were mistreating their wives, how they were abandoning the covenant that they had made. In these passages, what do you notice about the idea of a covenant relationship from the marriage perspective? I guess even, what's the difference between a covenant and a contract? A lot of people may enter into marriage today, and we didn't really talk about that, but they look at it from more of a contract basis, a contractual agreement, right? I mean, there's even the idea of a prenuptial agreement. What's the difference between a contract and a covenant?
Well, in a covenant, you make an agreement, and typically one party is the superior, makes what I'm going to do, and you agree to those terms, and you kill live animals, and you walk between them, and you speak what you're going to do, with the understanding that if you don't keep the covenant, you become like those dead animals. You're no longer anything of what you said you were.
Yes. Yes. So in terms of God's covenant relationship with us from that perspective. What about a contract? What is a contract in business? How do you negotiate a contract in business, right? You're thinking about what? It's a legally binding agreement, but I'm doing what? I'm protecting myself. What's best for me? I'm ensuring that I get out of this contract what I want to get out of it, right? You go walk into the AT&T store to get your phone, and what do? You agree to the terms, whatever they may be. They may fit your needs for however many minutes or whatever, and you sign a 3-year contract. But then after 6 months, you figure out that, well, no, wait a minute, my calls are getting dropped or this or that, and I'm kind of unhappy, and so what are you doing? Well, when is Verizon going to offer me a deal to help me get out of this so that I can leave AT&T and go into something else, right? Or if you follow college football right now, right, what do you do if you have a contract? If you got a really great agent, a great agent has a contract with a wonderful out clause for you, right? That you can walk away absolving yourself of any responsibility and get a check for $50+ million, right? That's what a contract does. A contract looks for protecting myself and my interest and protecting me for how can I get out of it in the event things don't live up to what I expected them to be. Contract is all about me. A covenant is all about what I put into it, not what I get out of it, about what I put into it. Interesting here also, did you notice that in Malachi, how is the Lord described? The Lord is described as a witness. Yeah, he is a witness to this covenant. He is a party to this covenant. God is a partner in our relationship. Do we think of it in that regards of a husband and a wife, the covenant relationship that we are in, that God is a witness and a party to that as well? And what he's saying here is they're complaining because their worship's not being accepted, my prayers aren't being heard. Why are my prayers not being heard? And God's saying, well, when you're mistreating the wife of your covenant, you're mistreating me. And I think that's a very deep understanding for us. And, do we think of God and the involvement in our marriage? Do we think, what will God think of what I'm doing? Does he think I'm being an effective husband? Does he think I'm being an effective wife? What will God think if I try to abandon this covenant? What if I'm like 75% of the people in this world or in this survey that think it's morally acceptable to abandon this covenant? What will God think of that? Elijah?
He is a witness, but he's also the judge.
He is
He knows all that we do.
Yes, he is the witness and our judge, able to discern the thoughts and very intents of our hearts at any point in time. What else anything else in this passage in Malachi strike you in regards to the idea of a covenantal relationship in marriage? Turn to Matthew chapter 19 then. Matthew chapter 19, starting in verse 1, Jesus had finished these sayings. He went away from Galilee. He entered the region of Judea beyond the Jordan. A large crowds followed him, and he healed them there. And the Pharisees came up to him, and they tested him by asking, is it lawful to divorce one's wife for any cause? And he answered, have you not read that he who created them from the beginning made them male and female, and said, therefore, a man shall leave his father and his mother, hold fast to his wife, the two shall become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. What therefore God has joined together, let not man separate. What do you observe about the idea of a covenant relationship here in Matthew 19? Divorce is, right? Yeah, separating it, right? So it's interesting. He doesn't even really want to focus on the exception. He wants to draw them back. Well, what was the rule? What was it at in the very beginning? What did God create, right? He brings them back to that very thought. God who created them from the beginning.
It says they're one flesh, and you don't cut off part of your flesh.
He says they're one flesh. You don't cut off one part of their flesh. The two shall, again, that idea of two becoming together, one man, one woman, one life together, sealed by God in a covenant. And God was the one that joined them together. Yes. I don't know if you were in the class on this past Sunday when Adam was teaching, but he was mentioning your father, Lauren, and like he enjoyed woodworking as a hobby, as part of a leisure time, right? And even though it was an oxymoron to him because the word working was actually in it, right? So they don't go together. But if you do that and you think about it, right, you've seen people to where they'll take two perfectly fine pieces of wood and use either wood glue or an epoxy or something like that, and they get joined together such that you almost can no longer recognize the two, and you can't separate and pull them apart, right? I guess if you're good at woodworking, don't leave it up to me, that would never happen, right? But from someone who actually is adept at it, Wes would probably be able to speak to that. But if you tried to take those apart, right, what is it going to look like? You're going to have to take a hatchet or, I don't know, some type of tool to actually physically break it and separate it. And what you're left with is you're left with two pieces that are not what they started with, right? The idea here of what God has joined together, let not man separate. What else do y'all notice in this passage?
The devotion becomes between the man and the wife and not to the parents. That relationship is changed.
The relationship is changed from from the parent-child relationship, that they have left that. Their focus now becomes upon each other, become pouring 100% of themselves into that relationship. Good comment. What else?
It says in here that God has joined them. It says the man does not have the right to separate.
Man does not have the right to separate. Yeah.
Can't make, it's okay for this reason.
Yep, yep. We think there's ample reasons from this world's perspective as to why that should happen. What else? Any other thoughts or comments about this? Do what? The mention of male and female. Yeah, exactly. I thought the combination of both this and what we saw in Malachi really illustrates the idea of divorce and unfaithfulness and how that really grieves God, and that He is a part of your covenant relationship in marriage, and it grieves Him when there is unfaithfulness and when there is the ideas of even thinking of contemplating divorce from that perspective.
And the Pharisees were saying, well, Moses let us get a divorce. And he said, yeah, but that was not pleasing to me.
That was never the intent as God designed it back in day 6 in Genesis chapter 2. So how does viewing, if I've articulated and you've thought about the difference between covenant and contract, how does viewing marriage as a covenant versus a contract change the way we handle challenges that come up?
Covenant, I think if there are differences, you try to work those out. But in a contract, you're going to be more or less fighting against each other, opposite views and desires rather than trying to, not
Yeah.
always, but
Yeah.
most of the time, you're like, well, I want to break this contract.
Yeah, yeah. So Roland said from a covenant perspective, you're gonna be seeking ways to work things out. Again, pouring yourself into it, as opposed to a contract. You're more looking for the opportunity to exit, right? To accrue whatever damages I can from the situation and protect myself. And I think that really gets back to that idea of it's not about how can I get out of this, but it's more about what can I put into this? And our focus is going to be, what do I need to do in that covenant relationship? So,
Being a preacher, at one time had a man come to him and say, I want to get a divorce from my wife. And Dad said, why? He said, well, I don't love her anymore. And he said, but I tell you what, I want you to try something. He said, I want you to go for a month, and I want you to say something kind to her every day and be nice
Oh, that's a great story, yeah. Put effort, intention into it, and you reap the results and the benefits of that. Other comments? Yeah, Lauren.
I would think that most people that view marriage as a covenant have some understanding that God is part of that. So when you're viewing it as a covenant, then you're understanding that you not only have a responsibility to the person that you're married to, but you also have a responsibility to God and to the promises and the vows that you've made. So you're weighing that in a completely different way than when you take God out of the picture and it's just a piece of paper that we sign.
Yes. Yeah, great comment. When you look at it from the perspective of a covenant with God as a party to it, you're much more intentional and aware of the vows that you are making. And we're not even really, I haven't even really touched on that, but that's an excellent point when you think about it, when you think about the vows that you're making, even in today's society, right? I promise to bring my wife coffee every day of our married bliss. Well, if you think about it are you going to be able to actually, fulfill that vow that you've made? Think about it from a serious nature of God as a participant to this wedding and the covenant. And sometimes our society, we can be very lighthearted in that regards. And that, again, demeans the value and the relationship and the image of what our marriage truly is. Look in Ephesians chapter 5. And try not to focus that much really on, because I'm sure we'll spend a lot more deeper time here, but not more so much on maybe the specific roles and each individual in the party to the covenant here, but more as we read this, think about it from a covenant perspective and what it is actually doing. Let's read verses 22 to 33. Verse 22 says, "Wives, submit to your own husbands as to the Lord, for the husband is the head of the wife, even as Christ is the head of the church, his body, as himself its Savior. Now, as the church submits to Christ, so also wives should submit in everything to their husbands. Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her, that he might sanctify her, having cleansed her by the washing of water with the word, so that he might present the church to himself in splendor, without spot or wrinkle or any such thing, that she might be holy and without blemish. In the same way, husbands should love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. For no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it, just as Christ does the church, because we are members of his body. Therefore, a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. This mystery is profound, and I am saying that it refers to Christ and the church. However, let each one of you love his wife as himself, and let the wife see that she respects her husband." What do you see in this passage in terms of how the marriage relationship is a reflection of Christ and the church?
It's a reflection of our submission with Christ as the head of the church. It's a reflection of the relationship, the loving, sacrificial love that Christ had for the church. We're supposed to, and, Marsh gave the example of the advice of what the preacher said. I spoke to another preacher once, and he told me a similar story of a guy came up to him and said, "I don't love my wife anymore." His response was, "When are you going to go forward and repent?" Because it's literally commanded, husbands, love your wives.
Yeah.
So he wasn't as nice as your father was.
Yeah.
But that's the kind of relationship that it's supposed to.
Yeah.
It's supposed to reflect that.
Great comment. We see, we didn't even touch on verse 20, even 21, this idea of submission, right? Submitting to one another begins there. The idea of submission just permeates throughout all of this. The idea of love permeates throughout all of this. Wives, submit as the church submits to Christ. Husband, loves your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her.
The church is the bride of Christ.
The church is the bride of Christ.
We are to submit to Christ, and the wife is to submit to the husband. But look at the responsibility that Christ took on. He died for the church, for the world.
He gave of himself fully to that. Great point. What else?
Paul talked about making one new man in Christ, the church, Jew and Gentile. He didn't make it one or the other. He made this new relationship, and that's what we've seen about marriage.
Yeah.
Becoming one. It's neither one or the other. It's both together.
Neither Jew nor Greek, neither slave nor free. Yes, you're a new creature together as one. That idea, that concept permeates several thoughts in here. Other thoughts?
Roger, I just kind of thought of this. You see both submission and sacrifice as qualities that Christ exemplified in his life. He completely submitted himself to doing his Father's will, and he sacrificed himself so that we may be able to partake in the inheritance in his kingdom. So it's qualities that both man and woman, the husband and the wife, should strive to do just as Christ did.
Yes.
Now, obviously, in this particular passage, the husband needs to give all of himself to his wife, to sacrifice anything and everything in his life to make sure that she is well taken care of.
Yeah.
And the wife is to submit to the husband. But the qualities that stick out are irrefutable when it comes to how Christ was when he was here on this earth.
Yes, great comment. This to me really exemplifies the difference that we've been discussing about contract and covenant, right? Nowhere in here do you see wives, this is, you go marry a Christian man and this is really what you're going to get out of it, right? Or husbands, this is what you're going to get out of your relationship. This is all written from the perspective of not how is it going to benefit me. It is all written from the perspective of what am I going to put into it. It's giving of yourselves. Wives doing this, husbands loving in a certain fashion. And that's what covenants are, and that's what covenants have always been. And we touched on this earlier a little bit in regards to Israel. Israel was to give themselves fully and completely to the Lord, to devote themselves wholly to him, right? First command, no other gods before me. That was the covenant relationship, completely giving themselves. That was a relationship language that was spoken to Israel back then. In marriage, we give ourselves fully and completely. Marriage isn't 50-50. Marriage is 100-100. God completely gives himself to his people. He completely has given himself to us. And he expects us to give ourselves to him in absolute love and trust and obedience. And that's what Ephesians 5 here is talking about. That's how marriage works. It's a covenant. It calls for giving of self out of loyalty, out of love, out of trust. It calls for me to give myself wholeheartedly to my spouse because we're in a covenant relationship which God has brought together and joined together. And you think about it, how else is the world going to see the picture of Christ's love for the church? One venue for that is through our marriage. When we think of a marriage as a covenant, it isn't about me, it isn't about your partner, it isn't about raising kids, it isn't about any of the other reasons which we may have discussed at the beginning as to why people enter into a marriage relationship. When we think about marriage as God portrays marriage, it becomes a picture of Christ's devotion to the church. And we're able to show to the world God's amazing sacrificial love, the value of faithfulness when we treat our marriages as a covenant relationship that's a mirror of God's covenant relationship with us. Any other thoughts? So hopefully,
I don't need to teach that, do that.
that was my roadmap, whether we might have veered off at times or been bumpy along the way, but hopefully we've kind of discussed the concept about recognition of God's design, a covenant relationship, and how the marriage is at. And now we'll dive deeper into the husbands and wives specifically. Thank y'all for your comments. Appreciate it.